Hey, good morning. It's a little blinding right here. On behalf of the entire federal team at Palo Alto Networks, welcome to 2017's Federal Ignite. This is easily one of the better attended federal events that we've ever done, and I thank you all for coming. We have an exciting day of discussions, keynotes, and technical demonstrations planned with some of the best and brightest from government and industry. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors. Your sustained collaboration with Palo Alto Networks is vital to our mission of preventing successful cyber attacks and maintaining trust in the digital age. Cybersecurity is truly a team effort, and we value your partnership and appreciate the generous sponsorships that have made today's program possible. As you all know, we're in the midst of Cyber Awareness Month, and I'm sure to each and every person in this room, every month is Cyber Awareness Month. But the timing of today's discussion offers a unique opportunity to hear from senior policymakers, thought leaders, and industry experts on the increasingly sophisticated challenges facing our federal government in the cyber domain. We have an exciting lineup of speakers that includes senior officials from the administration, members of Congress, and members of our executive team about how we can respond in a bold way to these challenges while effectively leveraging innovation to identify and execute on strategic cyber imperatives. Federal agencies are facing new opportunities and new risks. We must leverage new technologies and sound policies to minimize these risks. So to begin the conversation this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Congressman John Ratcliffe. Congressman Ratcliffe represents the 4th District of Texas, is the chairman of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee on the Homeland Security Committee. Throughout his tenure in Congress, Chairman Ratcliffe has been a leading voice on cybersecurity issues and has made improving our nation's security posture his subcommittee's primary focus. The congressman is the youngest of 6 children, raised by hardworking parents, both of whom are teachers. So without a doubt, this explains the congressman's dedication to public service. He's been a federal prosecutor, a mayor, and since 2014, a member of Congress. So thank you, Congressman Ratcliffe. I'm really fortunate that you have time to spend with us this morning. So I'd like to welcome you to our session.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick, and thank all of you for the warm reception. Apparently, you weren't listening, and you missed the part about me being a member of the least popular legislative body in the world. Right now, I think public opinion polls have Congress at about a 7% approval rating, and if you're wondering who that 7% is, I can tell you it's mostly family and staff. I say mostly, I should say mostly, because my friends back in Texas tell me that my 84-year-old mother no longer tells people that her son is a member of Congress. She thinks it sounds better to tell people that I'm a trial lawyer. So hey, whatever pretenses they use to fill the room, I'm grateful. To be able to talk with you this morning about a subject that I know we all care about, I'm grateful to be here to kick off Palo Alto Networks' Federal Ignite Conference and to be part of the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I know that later this morning you're going to get to hear from Palo Alto CEO Mark McLaughlin and from White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert. And let me start out by saying how lucky you are and we are to have folks like Mark and Tom as really critical parts of this conversation. People rightfully talk about the need for Congress and the White House and the private sector to work together to address the multi-generational challenges that are facing the American people today. And I can tell you that when it comes to cybersecurity, at least, it is happening, and it's happening on a daily basis. It was early in the Trump administration that Tom Bossert invited me over to the Situation Room at the White House to have a briefing with him and with the president's cybersecurity advisor, Rob Joyce, and really since then, Tom and I have remained in close contact on a host of national security and cybersecurity issues, and similarly, recognizing that it's largely the private sector technology, and not government-run programs that are responsible for protecting the overwhelming majority of America's networks, including our most critical infrastructure. I've really tried to make it a priority of my time in Congress to understand the evolving threat landscape from the perspective of folks in the private sector, like many of you out here in the audience. And you know, while white papers from think tanks are somewhat helpful, nothing really can replace the expertise of folks whose jobs and whose livelihoods really depend on protecting the networks from millions of attacks every day. And so it was really to that end that I reached out to Mark and his team at Palo Alto earlier this year. And Mark said, come out and see me in Silicon Valley. And I did. And I met with Mark and all the top executives out there. We talked cybersecurity policy, not for minutes, but for hours. I think, in fact, the meeting lasted longer than we both planned. And it really became quickly clear to me that Mark and his team, for them, this was not some sort of check-the-box endeavor. He really wanted to persuade me and excite me about what he believes is possible and practical with respect to addressing cybersecurity issues. And so both for him and for Tom Bossert, you know, I think it's as much about an abiding sense of public service as it is also a recognition that we simply can't afford not to lead the rest of the world when it comes to cybersecurity. None of us can afford that because, as folks in this room know, cybersecurity has become national security. There's really no denying that. When we used to talk about national security, we'd talk about protecting the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders, and the focus has always been on our physical borders. But the folks here in this room know that today, when we talk about that subject, we're really talking about protecting our digital borders as well, and the threats that millions of Americans face literally every minute of the day. And, you know, while I know that all of the stakeholders in cybersecurity in this debate have their parochial interests and concerns, many of you here in this room are here today to learn more, to be able to address that, but I think that we all have an obligation to be part of something bigger. And we have a moral imperative, if you will, to be part of a long-term solution when we talk about cybersecurity, because this is a national priority that is not going to go away in our lifetime. So throughout the program today, I think you're going to hear a lot about a growing movement for a national cybersecurity moonshot. That's something that Mark and I spoke about in that very first meeting, and I remember walking out committed to do whatever I could to support that initiative. And that's part of the reason that I'm here today. And my message and my mission on that front is simple. I'm clearly on board, but now I need to lean in and try to get other members of Congress on board as well. So it's not just here, and it's not just today that you'll hear me talking about this initiative. And I will tell you that as a lawmaker with direct jurisdiction over much of the civilian cyber functions of the federal government, I think I have an obligation as well to help provide some guiding parameters to this moonshot. When JFK gave his moonshot speech to Congress, he said, "I believe we possess all of the resources and talents necessary, but the facts of the matter are that we have never made the national decisions or marshaled the national resources required for such leadership. We have never specified long-range goals on an urgent time schedule or managed our resources and our time so as to ensure their fulfillment." And then President Kennedy set out 4 very specific and concrete goals that would lead our country to put a man on the moon. Similarly, today, I think that before we can work towards our own cyber moonshot, we have to define our objectives for that moonshot with great precision and clarity. Putting a man on the moon, that's a goal that's was crystal clear at the time, and while success was not easily achieved, it was easily defined, going from point A to point B. In an area as vast as cyber, we'll need to establish even more clear objectives. We'll need those objectives to chart a path towards success, but also to set the metrics to determine when we've actually achieved that success. Will it be a moonshot that improves collaboration and information sharing? Is better integration our specific goal? Will it be an immensely dedicated and persistent push for the funding and research necessary in cyber? Can we ultimately make the internet safe? These are questions that government and industry and academia are going to need to collectively grapple with. But for all of these questions and challenges, if you will, we do have some very distinct advantages over the space race in the 1960s or even current initiatives like trying to find a cure for cancer. Advantages because with cybersecurity, we are now trying to solve a set of problems where the tools that we need to solve those problems already largely exist. If you think about that for a second, we already have much of the innovation and technology that we'll need to accomplish the goals for any cyber moonshot. And that's thanks in part to many of the folks here in this room. But as increased connectivity and the Internet of Things explosion continues to expand dramatically the size of the attack surface, we'll have to ensure that folks at all levels, from government to private officials, from the federal level, the state, down to locals, will need to make sure that they have access to and can utilize the necessary security tools. So it'll be a matter of coordination. It'll be a matter of leadership. It's an issue of execution, integration, and implementation. Better protecting America from the threats in cyberspace. It may be aspirational, but it is not theoretical anymore. It is readily achievable right now. So that's why I will tell you all that I remain incredibly optimistic about our ability to gain or to regain the upper hand on our cyber adversaries out there. This is a challenge that the United States of America, the world superpower, is more than equipped to deliver upon. The good news is I think that our country is already rising to the challenge, and there's great evidence of that. We saw that with the Cybersecurity Act that we signed into law in the 114th Congress, one that created for the first time a formal framework for incentivizing the sharing of cyber threat indicators between the private sector and the government. And since the enactment of that law, we've seen that type of sharing really grow in terms of both its volume and its effectiveness. And organizations like the Cyber Threat Alliance, which I know Palo Alto has been a driving force behind, are actively working to continue to raise the bar in terms of the quality of the information that is now being exchanged. They have revolutionized, really, the approach to information sharing among competitors by deciding to compete on what they do with the threat information rather than competing on obtaining the information itself. And that is something that society is really going to benefit from as we go forward. Another point, the President's Cybersecurity Executive Order, something that Tom Bossert worked really hard to help put together and that was released this past spring. This has been really widely hailed by stakeholder groups as being very positive for our country's cybersecurity posture going forward. And in conjunction with the work that's underway by the American Technology Council and Chris Liddell and those folks, the executive order really recognizes that leveraging private sector innovations in an area like cloud security is going to be critical to modernizing the government's digital infrastructure in a way that is more automated to actively prevent, not just detect and respond to emerging cyber threats. Even with a macro political backdrop, if you will, that very clearly can be messy and divisive, I will tell you that I see a consistent bipartisan approach to tackling cybersecurity challenges that's very positive. In other words, what I'm telling you is this: cybersecurity legislative efforts thus far have not been contaminated by partisan politics, and I hope that it stays that way for the foreseeable future. Case in point, during my first term in Congress, the very first cyber bill that I had signed into law was the United States-Israel Advanced Research Partnership Act, and that was the direct of that very type of very broad bipartisan consensus and collaboration, and now it is a law that allows for shared researching on cybersecurity technologies that will mutually benefit both the United States and Israel. And I've had ongoing talks now with Tom Bossert over the last few months about ways to further strengthen the cyber alliance between the United States and Israel, and to use that as a model for other alliances with other allies around the world. Another example from just this week, and in fact, perhaps as early as today, President Trump will sign into law another one of my cyber bills, the Strengthening State and Local Cybercrime Fighting Act. It's a bill which authorizes the National Computer Forensics Institute, which some of you may know is a facility run by the United States Secret Service and has already trained close to 7,000 state and local officials, detectives and investigators and prosecutors and judges, and teaching them how to handle digital evidence and preserve the chain of custody necessary to use that cyber evidence in the prosecution and enforcement of crimes. So all of these things are a step in the right direction, and I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do thus far, but we've got to be bolder, and we've got to really step forward and now make this a true national priority. And I know that that is something that the folks in this room recognize as well. Looking ahead, it is going to be critical for government to focus on implementing security technologies that actively and actually prevent, not just detect and respond to emerging cyber threats. That means prioritizing our technologies to work together in an automated, holistic way to prevent attacks across an organization's entire network infrastructure, including in new cloud environments. Bolstering the cyber workforce, that also has to remain a collective priority. The federal government has an obligation to ensure that many of the special hiring authorities that agencies have been given to help them recruit and retain cyber talent are implemented more swiftly and more effectively. And similarly, to those of you in the private sector, you have a shared responsibility to help develop and train a pipeline of cybersecurity talent in the future. You know, later today, I'll get a chance to see an initiative that does just that. I'll get back together with Mark and with the Girl Scouts of America. Efforts like Palo Alto's partnership with the Girl Scouts to give them the opportunity to earn a cyber badge. We need to see more initiatives like that, and I encourage you to go forward and to try and create those in your own sector of influence. So, as you can see, whether we're talking about training a cyber workforce, protecting critical infrastructure, securing federal networks, the good news is that none of the challenges or issues that are out there, none of these are insurmountable. But in the cybersecurity world, it's time for the aspirational to now be implemented, and it's time for the hypothetical and theoretical to now become real. I think everyone in this room wants to look back and say they were part of the generation that really championed and coordinated a sustained campaign to give America the upper hand against our cyber adversaries. To quote a famous American who was part of the first moonshot, it's time for us to take that giant leap forward and make cybersecurity the next frontier of American innovation, ingenuity, leadership, and greatness. So let's get it done. Thanks for having me today.